Hello, everyone. And today we're so excited to talk to you. We're going to have a great podcast. I'm Julie Kirshner. I'm the Executive Director of FAIR. And today we are honored to have Sheriff Mark Lamb with us. We're going to be talking about all sorts of exciting things. But what we really wanted to do today was to announce that Sheriff Lamb is joining FAIR as a law enforcement advisor. And in that role, he'll be managing our law enforcement outreach program. And we hope to reach law enforcement agents all across this country. We know you all can be a force multiplier in the fight to restore sanity to our immigration system. So we're really excited and honored to have you here. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. Look, I'm passionate about the border. I know you guys are here as well. Immigration, border security. And this was, when you guys reached out, it was just a natural fit for me. And so I'm excited. I want to stay involved with the border stuff, want to stay involved in law enforcement. And what better opportunity to do it than right through FAIR? So for those who don't know me, I'm the sheriff out in Pinal County, Arizona, which is between Phoenix and Tucson. We are 5,400 square miles. So we're the size of the state of Connecticut. So it's a big county.
Wow.
But I'm not even one of the largest counties in Arizona. There's some of the bigger ones. Population-wise, we're about 500,000 people. Got about 600 employees. And while we're not on the border, we're one county off, but we're treated by the federal government as a border county. The funding that we get, we're treated as a Tier 1 county, but large in part because on the southern end of our county, we have an Indian reservation that extends into Mexico. So it's on both sides of the border. And so whatever comes through the desert, which I'm sure we're going to get into today, those gotaways you hear about, all that stuff, that comes through that desert area. That's where the cartel pushes people through. And then the other piece of it is we have the I-10 that runs through our county, right through the heart.
Takes everything north, south, and in between.
Anybody that crosses, most people that cross the border on the southern part of Arizona, and most of the fentanyl that crosses the border, which, by the way, is over 50% of what comes into America comes through Arizona's borders.
Wow.
That eventually will make its way through Pinal County on the I-10 or on one of the other highways. You got to come through our county to get to Phoenix. And so most of what is being smuggled in, at least through Arizona's borders, ultimately comes through Pinal County, which makes us very logistically important because whatever we don't stop, we're that last line of defense that's going to get into Phoenix, which has sadly become a de facto, it has been for a long time, but has become a de facto distribution hub for the cartels. And so that's a little bit about me. I've been the sheriff now for 8 years there, and I've loved every bit of it. And we're going to stay active in doing this border stuff, that's for sure.
Well, we are so thrilled to have you here. Tell me, what is the biggest challenge right now? I can think of tons, but what is the biggest challenge for you as a sheriff in Pinal County right now?
The biggest challenge for us is the border. You know, we've actually reduced our crime index over the last 7, 8 years.
Really,
when crime
even
is
though
on the
you're
rise,
right near the border.
We've reduced our crime index. However, we have seen large increases in crimes related to border security. So what would that be? That would be traffic stops. We saw from 21 to 23, we had a 361% increase in traffic stops involving human smuggling.
Wow.
We had a 460% increase in pursuits involving human smuggling, where they're running from us. We've had a 600% increase in fentanyl seizures through our county. So you can just see by the percentages, this has become a real problem for us. And then the byproducts of that are the fentanyl poisonings that we have to clean up. The Narcan, us giving people Narcan to save their lives, the human trafficking aspect of it. All of that has combined to be probably our biggest challenge that we're facing right now and significant challenge over the last few years.
Wow. And it must be really dangerous for your own agents. I mean, I've seen some of those stops with fentanyl, where agents will just fall to the ground from exposure. That's got to be, you have to have dedication to do that job.
You do. And we have actually had our own guys that we've had to take. we don't have body cams, so it doesn't make it to the national media. But we've had our own guys that we've had to take to the hospital because they started feeling the effects of fentanyl after being in contact. Like if I put handcuffs on you, just your sweat from your body can rub off onto our guys and cause a negative effect on our people. So, yeah, I mean, we're dealing with it every day. We just had last week, we had a load of, we pulled a guy over, and in the back of his car, on the back seat, he had a plastic moving container. And inside of there, when we opened it, he had 9 individual packages, which ended up being 10 kilos. Now, we didn't know initially what that was.
Wow.
Could have easily have been fentanyl, but luckily it was cocaine.
Isn't that a sad state of affairs when you say luckily?
But it's not near as dangerous to our guys as the fentanyl
Yeah,
would be.
exactly. Well, tell me, why is it so important to get law enforcement, to get sheriffs into the immigration debate?
Well, look, you can't deal with this problem with just the federal government. The federal government's responsibility is at the border. When it extends beyond the border, it quickly becomes a local law enforcement problem. Now, while we have a border patrol station in our county, which is 70, 80 miles off the border, where that station is, it's still it's not their primary. By then, we've really diluted it, and so it really has to be a joint effort. And we mentioned immigration. I really think this is two problems, oftentimes intertwined into one. Well, they are intertwined into one, but I think that they are dealt with in two separate ways. You have immigration, which becomes a problem at the federal level with legislators, Congress, Senate, coming up with common sense immigration plan to address the immigration problem. The immigration problem of people here illegally, the immigration problem of people coming here, and then you have the border security problem. The immigration problem precipitates a problem with border security. And what we have seen is an immigration problem and a border security problem. And you need local law enforcement to be a good partner in that. We work hand in hand with Border Patrol. I have 3 helicopters and an airplane. We fly those almost every day for Border Patrol. We are constantly helping people, pulling people out of the desert that the cartels, the scouts have left, or the coyotes have left for dead. And they're not real coyotes. They're people who are bringing, smuggling people into the country. We're constantly working with Border Patrol. We have a great relationship and working relationship with them. That relationship deteriorates significantly the higher up you go. And by the time you get to Washington, D.C., we have little to no communication.
It's just all politics by that point?
By that time, politics has washed it out.
Wow. Well, you talked a little bit about the challenges you face in Pinal County, but a little broader, speaking more nationally, what do you think the biggest problem or the biggest impact the open borders policies, our current open border policies, have had on the southern border? I mean, just speaking a little broadly.
So let's take it back 3 years ago, 4 years ago, fentanyl.
Yeah.
3 years ago, fentanyl. 2 years ago, fentanyl crime. Now what we're seeing a lot of being talked about is just the amount of crime we're seeing.
The gangs.
The amount of gangs that are coming in here. And I think that's inevitable when you have I think the number is about 15 million people. But by the government's, by their numbers, it's probably 10, 11 million they've been acknowledged. I think it's higher than that. You have that amount of people come in, where do you put them? Pretty much every community starts to be affected. And then as they become more and more desperate, maybe they owe the cartels money for coming into the country. Now, what do they resort to pay for that? Maybe they resort to crime.
Yeah.
And if you're a gang member in another country, it's not like you show up here and decide you're going to change your tiger stripes. Like a tiger's a tiger. And they come here and they begin to, as they get to know the system, they start to implement crime. So I think as they get more and more comfortable, we're seeing that crime push up. But please, we cannot forget the fentanyl in this conversation because the leading cause of death in America for Americans between the ages of 18 and 45 is fentanyl poisonings. And so I think anybody that says that that is not the biggest challenge still, because it's claiming more than 100,000 American lives. But I have seen where the narrative has shifted more to we're starting to really have more and more criminal, really some heinous crimes too, committed against Americans that are by people who are in this country illegally.
You know, it's interesting. I remember when I got involved in immigration almost 20 years ago, I used to talk to Border Patrol agents, and they'd say, no, the human smugglers and the drug smugglers, they're separate. They run their different shops, if you will. And what's amazing over the last 2 decades is to see how they've consolidated power. And they now use people as decoys, and they move drugs in, or they know that they're willing to lose a little bit of their load in order to get the big rest of the load through the border. And now it's just scary how much power is being wielded by the cartels just south of the border. I mean, it's there. It's a 2,000-mile border.
It is. And you bring up a really excellent point, because I think a lot of Americans overlook this. They think there's the human smuggling side of it and the drug smuggling. No, those are intertwined. It may have a decade ago, 2 decades ago, maybe they were different. But what happened is as the policies, government policies, started to play a major role in what was happening at the border, the cartels started realizing there was a real opportunity for money to be made.
Yeah.
And they made money under the previous administration by charging people a ton of money because it was really hard to come in. Then when this administration made it very easy, then what they did is they started making a ton of money because they were able to reduce the costs, and they had a ton of people that wanted to come across.
I mean, it's economics, right?
And they went from making $500 million a year to an estimated $13 billion a year. And the biggest part of that is most people, if you are in business, you'll understand this is cash on hand. Cash is king. So the way the cartels have worked for decades is they predominantly dealt in drugs. So what would happen is they would bring marijuana, cocaine, methamphetamine. They would bring it into the country, and they had to pay to move it all along the path. And by the time they got it to, let's say, Ohio, they would sell it, and then they would have to start to bring the money back to Mexico or to whatever cartel was selling it. That's a heavy lift. It's a lot of logistics. It's a lot of time between the time they produce the product to collecting the money from the product. Now they have people show up with cash in hand, $5,000, $6,000, $10,000, handing the cartel $10,000 cash. And these are thousands and thousands of people a day that are paying the cartels tens of thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
I mean, they're making just crazy amounts of money, and it's cash. So now they have this huge amounts of cash. Like, what do I do with this cash? Why don't I buy weaponry?
Yeah.
Why don't I buy more soldiers? Why don't I buy? They've become more powerful than the actual government in those areas down in Mexico.
That's unbelievable.
So,
and what's really sad, too, is that, I mean, it's such a tragedy at every different level. So you have migrants who are coughing up their life savings and leaving their countries behind in the hope of a better future. They're giving it to the cartels. And then, if they make it here alive, they arrive and they have nothing. And then the American people are subsidizing their presence here. And it's this vicious circle. I mean, it's nuts. And really what we're doing is we're subsidizing the cartels in the end.
That's it. The people who make out are the cartels and maybe some government people along the way.
Yeah.
But for the majority of them are the cartels that are actually benefiting from this. I get oftentimes people who don't. This has become such a politicized issue that I have people oftentimes that'll say, well, you don't get the humanitarian side, or you just are racist, or you don't care about people. I would say the contrary is true. I would say that we care more than anybody else because we're the ones that actually are on the ground and we see it firsthand. I don't see any of these politicians from Washington, D.C. standing there putting bandages on the feet of the people or worn the skin off their feet, or who are picking up the pieces from a woman who has been raped multiple times, or to try to give water to somebody who is dying in the desert, or to see their faces when you pull them over. You kind of hit on it. When somebody pays their life savings and they take a risk to come to this country, they did it illegally, which was the first problem, but our government hasn't been good about saying don't. No. So they come here and they're being beguiled by bad policies and by the cartels. And in many cases, NGOs, non-governmental organizations, who are also enticing these people to come here. So then they show up to here, and then they pay the cartels, and they walk through the desert in the freezing cold night and the blazing hot day. And they're almost to Phoenix, only to have me and my guy stop them on the I-10. To see the devastation in their faces, as to know that everything they just put into this, their life savings, the blood, sweat, and tears, gone.
Yeah, and it could all be avoided if the government, if the Biden-Harris administration would actually, I don't know, enforce the laws. Right. I mean, those laws that are on the books. Those are the same laws that have been enforced for decades. We were talking earlier, I was talking with some of my staff here, and we were saying, you don't have to point to, the previous administrations, but I mean, for decades, people have been stopping illegal migrants at the borders and sending them back through expedited removal, all sorts of things where their asylum claims are still heard, and sending them back quickly. And if they did that, and they said, hey, look, you're not going to get past us, then people around the world would get the message, and it wouldn't be worth it to cough up their savings anymore, make that dangerous journey, or agree to carry drugs on their way up, or whatever the case might be. And so what we really need to do, our position, FAIR's position, is we need to stop this at the source, and that means the federal government has to step up and enforce the laws, and we need to regain control of our immigration system.
What she said. That's exactly it. Look, I mean, it's not rocket science. It's if you break the law, you hold people accountable under Title VIII. That's what we have. That's what the government has said. This is the law. We expect that you abide by it. But then the government in turn is saying, we're not going to hold you accountable for the same law that we made.
Yeah.
That's the message they send, and it's a very conflicting and confusing message for people that want to come here as well. You're basically insinuating that, some of our laws matter, some don't. That's just not true. Like, we can't just start to have a lawless society. This country was built on the rule of law. Yeah. And when you start to deteriorate that, especially at the border, you send a message that we are not a country of laws and rules. And it is the federal government's responsibility. Their messaging has mattered. The messaging that we have seen has increased the flow of people to this country. And it is not only victimizing Americans through crime or through financial burdens, because we are shouldering this. We are paying for this. And it is our tax dollars that is paying for not just NGOs to bring them here, but also we're paying for hotel rooms. And we have Americans that don't get that.
Yeah.
And so, but then we also have the victimization of the people who are trying to make a better life for themselves, and they're being misled or they're doing it illegally. And a lot of it is because our immigration system's broken.
Yeah.
And it takes forever for somebody to come here and actually become a citizen. The problem is the way it is right now, we're getting the third world of the third world. And it's having an effect. And I think the average American is seeing what the effects of an open border is. And nobody in their right mind, no country in the world will ever tell you that an open border is going to it will work for you. Yeah. Throughout history, it never does work. And if you catch these folks who are pro-open borders and you ask them, okay, well, let's take the doors off of your house and let's take the wall down. They immediately become real quiet because they know that makes no sense. And it makes no sense to have an open border on the southern end of our country, or on the northern end for that fact, because the northern border is becoming we're seeing more and more crossings up there as well. And I'm really concerned about who comes across the northern border, as I am about the southern border. But the northern border, they come from Canada. So you have to ask yourself, who does Canada let fly into Canada? And then those folks are the ones crossing the border. And a lot of those are Middle Eastern countries with whom we are not friends right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, tell me, we know that the federal government needs to step up. And this has been a fight that FAIR's been involved with. 45 years. We're celebrating our 45th anniversary, so that's exciting. But we've been involved in this for decades. The federal government needs to step up. But while we sit here and we take our swords and our shields out and we go out and fight in Capitol Hill for, sane immigration laws, what can the states and locals do? And you have seen this firsthand as a sheriff. How can local officials get involved?
That's a great question. And it starts by, look, you can't have sanctuary cities. These folks who believe that they can make their cities sanctuary cities, I think a lot of them are ruining the fact that they did that. New York, a lot of these places that bragged about being sanctuary cities, it was easy to do when you didn't have tens of thousands of people showing up. Now that you do, all of a sudden it's not so cute. But we got to just eliminate that. And, maybe what there is if you become a sanctuary, you lose your federal funding. I don't know. There's a lot of different ways you could go about it. But you can't encourage that behavior. It's not okay. I think there needs to be a more of an effort to work and incentivization to work with local law or to federal law enforcement. But in the end, I'm a 10th Amendment guy. I believe that the power is to the states. That we've seen the federal government become far too powerful, and now we rely on them for too much, and they're not doing their job. The states, Arizona and Texas are right now fighting to take some level of power back. Mm-hmm. And they're saying, look, if you fail to do their job, then we should have the right as a state to protect our borders. So Arizona and Texas are both pushing measures. We have a ballot measure in Arizona, Prop 314, which would give local law enforcement, so sheriffs and state troopers in that southern end of our county, to hold people accountable. It will be a state law. Because right now, I don't know how many of your viewers know, immigration, coming into this country illegally, is only a federal law. Mm-hmm. Arizona and Texas are trying to say, okay, well, if you fail, then we need to be able to do something about it. I think this is the difference between 10 years ago when Arizona tried to pass SB 1070, mm-hmm. which was more immigration heavy. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where they got into problems. I still think they should have challenged it 10 years ago. Whatever we do to help fix this problem, the federal government will swoop in and try to stop us from doing it.
Isn't that insane?
And that's insane.
It is.
But states need to do it nonetheless. You can't raise the white flag and say, well, it's not going to do any good anyway. You got to try. In Arizona, I hope this law passes. I think it will. And it will give local authorities the ability to say, this is a state law now. If you come into this country illegally, we're going to hold you accountable. Mm. Some states are going to have to push back and really start to take control of this in their states. It's easier for the border states to do. But being active and being involved in groups that are telling, like FAIR, that's what I love, is you're giving people the information that they need to know, the truth about the border, which is really hard to find because if you're looking at the media, you're going to get it from one end on one set of channels, and on the other channels, you're going to get the other side of it. I've yet to see all of it. And I think organizations like yours bring a real truthful light to it. And so I would encourage more local officials to be up to speed with what's going on and who's coming into this country and what the negative effects are and how we deal with it. Yeah,
just sanctuary cities alone, I mean, you put your finger on it. Just think of how many criminals are being released because they will not honor ICE detainers. And it's crazy. Even ICE now, so even under the Biden-Harris administration, which has been completely lax on enforcement, they are hoping, I mean, Massachusetts was a good example recently. They wanted to detain someone upon being released from prison for a rape. I mean, it's horrible. And they let them go because they won't pass a state law, or they don't have jurisdictions that will implement policies to coordinate with the federal government. And it's It's absolutely shameful. Just think of the victim and how that poor victim feels knowing this person is loose.
Yeah.
And how many other people would be threatened. I mean, here's someone who was convicted in a court of law, and they still decide, no, we know better than you. We're not going to hand over this person who's just been, in jail for however long. So I hear these stories and I get so frustrated because it doesn't have to be this way. And if there were better cooperation, as you said, it wouldn't be this way.
Well, and I think for a long time, Americans thought those were one-off stories or scary you bedtime stories. But the recent statistics that were released where it shows that 13,000 murderers were convicted and there's 1,900 active murder cases where people were walking the streets with us. Those are the illegals that are in the country.
Yeah.
13,000. 20,000, I think, were assault charges, a bunch of thousands of sexual assault charges.
15,000, I think, sexual assault
charges. And so, like the statistics that they released recently goes exactly to your point, that because of these sanctuary cities, because of these places that have been unwilling to work with the federal government, and because of the federal government's unwillingness to remove these people. By giving them temporary protective status, then what you're seeing is what we're seeing now.
Yeah.
And I think it is appalling to me that there is even one murderer from another country that is still in our country walking the streets with us. I mean, I think that we have a responsibility as government to remove everybody that commits a crime in this country, especially a violent crime on another person. I think I'm like you. I think it's just despicable that they would not allow the federal government or ICE to come in and remove these people. Yeah.
Well, tell me, how do you plan to use your new role as FAIR's law enforcement advisor? What are your plans? What do you want to do with this project?
Look, in law enforcement, if you bring somebody in that's not law enforcement, immediately we put up a barrier. That's just normal.
You don't trust us, huh?
Over time, we've learned to really trust one another, especially when you go into battle with one another. And so I really think having somebody who's been there, walked in the shoes of a lot of these guys, that knows what they're dealing with, whether it's a local police chief or a sheriff, I think there's a level of respect that immediately opens a lot of doors. And I look forward to bringing that to the table and being able to sit down with these. You guys have the great information. I hope to be able to open the doors to get the information in those doors and really activate a lot of these police chiefs, sheriffs from across this country, really educate a lot of our ground level troops, police and sheriff's deputies that are out there doing this work. I think that there's a lot we can do, and I think the time is, sadly, I wish we weren't in this time, but because of the time we're in, I think there is a heightened sense of interest in the border issues and what comes along with it, between the fentanyl and the crime and everything that we're seeing in this country. There's a lot of people across this country, law enforcement especially, that is saying, wait a second, we do have a real problem here, and I need to know more about it. And I hope to be that guy that bridges that gap, to gets them that knowledge that they need. So
we're excited and we're honored to have you. And for all of you out there, Sheriff Lamb will be coming to a community near you. So stay tuned. You'll hear more from us. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, and thank you for all you do as well. You got a great staff here, and I've always been impressed with just the amount of work you do and the information you put out there, and it's helped me along my career, and I look forward to seeing where it takes us here at FAIR.
Thanks.
Thank you.